Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to the University of Nebraska at Omaha campus. Just when we think that we've worked things out so that our young people are not drinking and driving, that they are safer, after these years and years of work on this issue, we find that's not necessarily the case. My guest this week is Diana Reby. I have talked with her many times over the years. She is the executive director of Project Extra Mile, which is a statewide network of people who are involved in making this unacceptable in the minds of the communities and the young people,
right,
those under 21. There are a lot of things kind of in the news that you are concerned about that you wish had been long gone.
Certainly. Especially as you mentioned, the college campus situation with the college binge drinking is a huge issue and hopefully gets the kind of attention that it needs. I mean, too many kids are dying, drinking large amounts of alcohol and out dying. So it is something that we need to pay attention to.
Well, let's talk about that just for a second since you brought it up. There have been an inordinate number of young people, specifically college,
right,
because that's a demographic that's easy to
right,
identify. And if they're in a fraternity house or something when
right,
it happens, and college comes to mind. But we had the young lady from Nebraska, Samantha Spady,
right,
and she was in Colorado going to school, and this story was repeated too many times in the last year. And the liquor is available, and kids don't know that being able to hold your liquor can actually be a dangerous thing. All these kinds of myths. But I thought that things were tougher, that there was, that the universities were cracking down. They've done studies at Nebraska, I know they have.
Right. Well, the one thing that we need to know and recognize up front is that underage drinking over the last 20 years, we've made enormous progress.
Right.
I mean, so we've made significant progress and great inroads. But what we are seeing, just in a very kind of layman's term analogy, is that kids who are drinking much younger. They're drinking extreme amounts, and they're drinking frequently. So those kids who are going to have problems are having problems early, and they're sadly leading to the most serious consequence, oftentimes death. So that's what we're seeing.
So what, I know you are sort of in touch with the people on the national level that are interested in this. What kinds of strategies, in fine-tuning this so that we approach the now,
right,
as you mentioned, the younger, more alcohol, the binge drinking.
Right. Well, the difficult thing is that the now is more challenging to address, because what we do know and have learned, and is good news, is that it can be addressed, but it's done through something called environmental prevention. So it's about looking at the entire environment that those young people are living in, working in, going to school in, and saying, how is that environment contributing or making more available and accessible alcohol to our young people?
So how is it? Because, I mean, theoretically, with the punishments or consequences
right,
for people who sell alcohol, and granted, people buy it for younger people, but that's not always the case. We have driver's licenses in Nebraska, for instance, that are much more
right,
identifiable as minors' licenses.
Well, that's important to note, because first off, even though retail outlets are one way that kids can access alcohol, including college-age kids, it's not the most common way. I mean, it certainly should be addressed, and we do address that, but most young people access alcohol through another adult of age, oftentimes related, or through a friendship. So the fake ID issue is an issue in a small segment of the population.
It's lessened.
It is lessened, and it's less just completely of an issue. So how you address it is looking at that full environment, looking, as the National Academy of Sciences report to Congress said, focusing now on adults and not on young people, because we focus so much on kids, on individuals, we've forgotten the environment in which we're raising them. So it really is looking at the policies that are in place, the enforcement of those policies, the outlet density, the kind of marketing and advertising practices, and then how we bring that together through education awareness. But education and awareness can't do it alone. So it's important that we look at that full picture.
there are colleges that talk about and have talked for the last several years about cracking down. And I think on the campuses themselves, now fraternity and sorority houses, which have kind of been, not to lay the blame at their doorstep, but they get the more of the attention. And
well, kids who are in fraternities and sororities drink more than kids who are not. So it's a very appropriate connection to make, actually.
But they're not necessarily on campus, depending on which campus
Well,
you're on.
And you bring up a really good point, Carol, because what you have are universities oftentimes kind of distancing themselves from those living arrangements because they may be technically off campus. And you know, unfortunately, young people look at that as kind of duplicitous behavior and speaking out of both sides of our mouths. Because to go to college and to belong to a fraternity or sorority, you believe you're belonging to a unit of that college or that university. So
right.
It's not a complete
It's an
distancing.
extension that you don't,
absolutely.
It's blurred, the line.
It's blurred, absolutely.
What has always amazed me is that I'm sure that the national organizations, fraternities and sororities, do not, you know, like this happening.
Right.
They basically want, especially the adults that run those organizations, the alumni, are very concerned. They do philanthropic work. They're very concerned
Right.
about the future of these young people. That's why they stress academics and things like that. But you have all these alumni living in the, you know, in the near environs around. I mean, it's so easy
Right.
to check.
It is so easy to check, and it's important for those adults to not turn, you know, a blind eye to behavior. And so it is about checking on those, what are the living conditions and really what are the practices. So that is very, very valid.
Your latest concern involves the consequences of what the punishment or the thing, whatever they call it legally.
The penalties,
the penalties
right, exactly.
for selling to minors after
Right.
so many violations, and most recently involves a hotel, a bar in a hotel in Lincoln.
Right, which actually in this situation was hosting a fraternity sorority party.
A dance
Right,
kind of thing.
exactly. So that there's one area in which the environment around that campus can respond in a way that's different.
That's the way where the campus extends, so to
it
speak.
extends into the community, and so those policies, whether they're hotel policies, restaurant policies, or liquor control commission policies, have to really come up, if you will, and surround in a very positive way that youth population and say, we mean no, we have a 21 law, we don't have an 18 law. And so with that 21 law, our policies are going to reflect that. So, but yes, it's a hotel in Lincoln that brings the most recent kind of attention.
Well, explain what happened that has kind of got your group and a number of groups that are working in alcohol use prevention.
Right. What happened is a number of years ago, back in 1999, actually we have it passed, a number of public health, safety, and prevention organizations worked to get what's referred to as the buyout issue passed in the legislature. And that allows the commission to no longer allow businesses to always buy out of penalties if they have sold to a minor or allowed a minor to possess on their premises a second or subsequent time. So we're not talking about retailers who on a first violation go before the Liquor Control Commission. We're looking at those businesses that have, as I call them, the worst of the worst. If you're coming before the commission one time, so be it as a one opportunity, but when you come a second or subsequent time, the commission really ought to mean business, and we ought to see a swift and certain penalty come as a result of that. So we were able to allow the commission to not allow penalties to be bought out on second and subsequent for a portion of, as we call it, a hard suspension time. That is on a second violation, 2 to 10 days close time.
Yeah, they have to close that
Absolutely.
facility for.
Well, they have to
or not-
actually stop selling alcohol during that period of time, so they wouldn't close the business.
They wouldn't have to, yeah.
They would just simply not sell alcohol during that period
Which
of
in
time.
in a lounge in a hotel
would be a challenge.
would be a challenge.
Would be a challenge. So one would think that would be a serious consideration when a business is establishing policies and also implementing and making sure those policies are adhered to. This particular business, the NBC Suites in Lincoln, had a violation, a subsequent second violation, and the commission in November allowed that business to buy out of that full penalty, therefore not imposing that hard suspension time.
In other words, they paid a hefty fine.
They paid a fine.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that the commission has deviated from that standard that was set through that hard-won hard-fought battle that many in public safety and public health worked for back in the late 90s to get in state statute.
To be fair, or at least for full disclosure, maybe it was after the fact, and maybe that getting caught the second time prompted them to do this where they should have done it before, but it looks as though that Embassy Suites is taking a little more proactive with training, not allowing that kind of dance anymore.
And those are, I mean, those are good things, and those are certainly commendable.
So did the commission feel that mitigated the fact that
I wish I can't answer that because I don't know.
Did they say?
I can tell you that there are many businesses that also take the kind of measures that this business did once they have had a violation.
And had to stop selling liquor on subsequent
So
offenses.
I don't know that I can answer that, but those are good steps that they've taken. But what needs to happen is the penalty really needs to reflect the violation, which what we're saying is that this one deviated from those penalty guidelines.
So, but otherwise the law seems to be working. But you just don't want them to make a habit of this.
Well, there's, I think, a nervousness amongst those of us who work in prevention, especially as we talk about environmental prevention, that it may set a precedence because what would the commission say? What would be the decision when another business came before them and did the same as this business and requested a deviation from those guidelines?
And then the other thing is that thing called the courts. And we've, in the whole liquor issue in Nebraska, and not to say the courts are bad, but they have to interpret the law to see if you are being arbitrary in how you. So if they did that a few more times, maybe the courts could say, you know, these were similar, and yet you let them off the hook. So you know, the courts are meant to watch how
to balance
we
that.
Carry out laws, and they have many times and in many instances in the liquor area, which we'll talk about a little later. So, but that's that whole environmental thing that you talked about. Do we, for instance, work hard enough to ferret out and punish the whole issue of not telling who sold you the liquor? Because I hear this happening over and over. And you know, I don't think you should throw kids in the slammer because they won't tell. But this is, I mean, there is a code that is pretty darn tight.
Yeah, I don't think that we do. It's called source investigation. And so when you have a minor who would go to court on a minor in possession or a minor in consumption, there really ought to be, first from the law enforcement perspective, the question, where did your alcohol come from? And then once that person gets to the court, it really should be part of the measure of how that case proceeds forward. We do it in drug cases all the time, other drug cases.
In terms of what they'll be charged with or what the penalty would be or something.
What's the recommendation from the prosecutor to the court, to the judge?
Do we need some changes in the law on that or
I don't know
sentencing guidelines?
We haven't actually looked at changes in the law in that area. What we have done is worked with law enforcement and prosecutors to say, please begin asking that question because it is relevant and it takes the focus. It's not that young people should not be held responsible, but they're not the only ones accountable. So it takes it out beyond the individual.
Right, you don't want to punish the, in a sense, the victim because they are young, many times younger than, you know, in the realm of 16 or so. And we, unless they went out and, you know, did a couple axe murders, we wouldn't try them as adults and, you know, be as hard on them.
Well, there's one fact that's really kind of indisputable, and that is whenever young people get access to alcohol, unless they've stolen it, there's an adult somewhere facilitating that transaction, be it through a sale or through provision as an adult person. So
again, you go back to the environment.
Absolutely, yeah.
One of the other environmental issues that you're dealing with is the density of retail outlets, bars and convenience stores that have liquor licenses in small towns. I mean, we can look at the whole White Clay issue.
Yes.
But not even as small as White Clay.
Right.
And also neighborhoods, being sort of a small town within an area.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the same thing.
It's an excellent point, and we have continued to say and urge to the Commission and the legislature that Nebraska has, according to the Nebraska State Patrol, the largest number of liquor license outlets per capita than any state in the union. In the Sarpy-Douglas County metro area, we have about 1,400 liquor licenses. That's a tremendous amount of license holders in a metropolitan rural area with the size of population. White Clay is an obvious, again, that's the poster child for outlet density problems.
4 bars in a population of
15 or something.
And then, of course, I mean, for those that have been living in a cave, it's near the border of South Dakota where the reservation is.
Right, and they sell something like 10 or 11,000 cans of beer every day.
For having just, I think, less than 100 people.
Actually, 15 people.
15
it really
people
is very, very few. And so there really should be and ought to be some standards, and the state needs to look at it. So we say that the outlet density really matches what a community wants and a community reflects. Neighborhoods are a perfect example.
Well, the law, I believe, says public interest, convenience, and necessity.
Exactly, exactly.
And so interest is the public in that town interested in having liquor available. Convenience, yes, they shouldn't have to go 4 towns away. And necessity, I mean, there's only so much you need, unless you're rubbing it in wounds.
Right, exactly. And that's an argument and a discussion we've had again with the Commission and the Legislature to help them to see that that is an area that needs to be addressed. Lest Nebraska get to a point where we say, you know, when is enough enough? Because you find neighborhoods, as you find in the Cartier situation, as well as the Saddle Creek area here in Omaha.
These are areas in Omaha,
absolutely, where neighborhoods are saying, you know, this is not right. Our neighborhood and our families are being negatively impacted. So it is a valid concern and needs to be addressed.
And which takes us back to the fact that if you have a pulse, you're a resident of Nebraska, and you haven't, I'll use the axe murderer thing. No, you haven't. You're not a criminal in the legal sense of the word. You can pretty much not be denied a liquor license. That's oversimplifying.
It is oversimplifying. However, I would encourage any average citizen to attend just 2 hours worth of one of those meetings or those hearings of the Liquor Control Commission, and there aren't many folks who leave there saying this is a fair, reasonable, and is there for the benefit of families in the state process, because exactly as you said, oftentimes you see folks who the average citizen would say, there is no way this person should be receiving a license.
To sell drugs,
absolutely. A legal drug in certain situations.
Yeah, well.
But absolutely, going into a contract with the state of Nebraska, an agreement to sell that product. And so it is kind of alarming, and the standards do need to be tightened. Communities, municipalities need to have more input, and more of their voice needs to be reflected in those decisions.
Well, there's a couple of issues with state law, though, and I don't think that the Liquor Control Commission as a whole would deny that there needs to be some changes. Number one, for instance, I know certain cases where Omaha, the City Council has recommended that they not get a liquor license. And the commissioners feel by law, because they've been overturned too many times, saying you don't have a real reason to deny them legally.
That has been their argument, but what we have urged them is to provide the leadership. I mean, they have been appointed by the governor to provide leadership on alcohol control policy. And so if it needs to be changed, it is the body of the commission to recommend and to work for that change, and that's really where it's at, and it's at their feet that it's laid at this point.
Well, Hobart Roop, who is the executive director, who worked for 3 years for the Liquor Commission as a member of the Attorney General's office, he said that this is going to happen. Now, I don't know when, but they are looking at that. But there's more than just changing the law from you shall do this to you may do this, and things like that. There are things, should we put things like mitigating things like density, and such as, not limited to. I mean, what do we need to foresee?
Well, those are all exactly the kinds of issues that have to be addressed, and I know that Mr. Roop has been addressing those. We've urged, and as have other prevention organizations and safety organizations, to bring forward a task force, a working group, if you will, to look at those issues, because they're long-term. These aren't going to be solved in this legislative session, nor are they going to be solved this year. But they're very important issues that need a larger view and a larger perspective, and they still need the leadership of that commission.
How Omaha is different and yet not different from a small town.
Exactly.
it depends on kind of the issue and the dynamics. But you get out to the smaller, lesser populated areas to work with the people that are
Right.
In unison and in tune with you. How do they feel about having more constraints?
They don't want more constraints. What they do want, excuse me, is they want the kind of input into those decisions that says that their community voice has been heard. And what we've attempted to do as we go to those communities is to really urge their city councils, their county board of supervisors to say, even though you have felt a bit ignored in that process, we want you to re-engage in the discussion. Even if the answer at the commission level is no for a period of time, it only changes because you have re-involved yourself in that discussion and have said and demanded that the community voice be heard. And if a change is required in public law, then a change needs to be required, and we go about the process of doing that.
Well, then once they get engaged in small towns and larger towns all over the state, then if that ever comes up where a statute is introduced, statutory change is introduced, there will be likely to be more pressure on the state senators to change that.
Sure.
But I've always felt, and maybe this is a stereotype, that our smaller towns and as you get in greater Nebraska, and gosh, I don't blame them. It's sort of like, stay out of our business. There's that sort of maverick kind of. I think we don't do that as much in larger cities because it's more complex.
Right.
But are you running into any of that?
Well, not so much. I mean, you do have those smaller communities probably want more control, and sometimes those decisions are based, and it's.
But they want to have the control as opposed to.
They do. They
someone
do.
above them.
Well, they do, and that's an excellent point.
So
because
changing the law is it kind of a.
It's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. It is a tightrope, and there has to be. It can't be unfair. It can't be capricious, and so there have to be some guidelines, and
or
that's
just
appropriate.
maybe giving local recommendations more weight, being allowed
Absolutely.
to give.
And that's exactly what the commission is looking at in their legislative letter that they've recently finalized. And what we would again encourage is that they provide the leadership to see that that is implemented.
The numbers of young people who drink, you say, is going down, but the amount and the accessibility, are still issues. Some people would just say, you've kind of got your underwear in a clinch because, we have made these improvements. And yet I talked to Samantha Spady's mom and dad, and just one. If it's yours, is and to have a life, and you can say, well, she was binge drinking and she was this, but
well, I think it's important, and I think sadly, Samantha was a perfect example of apparently a wonderful child, and it tells us and reminds us that good kids die as well. And it's not about.
It's easy to say, well, I'm not so concerned if the bad kids are dying. I know they don't,
because
nobody
it's never
would verbalize that.
That's right. It's never
my
my child. That's never my child. And so that needs to be set aside and put to rest, because it's not about good kids, bad kids, good parents, bad parents. Again, parents and kids are responsible, but they're not the only ones accountable. So we need to take it into the larger environment, and we need to make sure that we're, to someone I guess who would say, gee, aren't you a little tight on this? I don't think you can be. I mean, I think you do it in a reasonable way, in a respectful, professional way, but you still persevere, because as a community, why would we in such a cavalier way say, those aren't really human resources we need? Those are expendable. They're not expendable. They're our children. So.
Well, the other thing is that another thing in Nebraska and about every other state in the union the last couple of years is concerned about programs that cost money.
Sure.
If you change the law to allow a liquor commission that already exists to have more choices and more latitude, that doesn't cost anything.
No, actually, it's a really good point, Carol, because policy changes and oftentimes enforcement, it's about changing the way an organization does business. Law enforcement, for instance, it's a way an agency may look at this issue differently than it did before, take it more serious, costs no money. Those are changes that a community can do because they begin to change attitudes. So most of those are really cost-free.
I know I went with some of the local law enforcement on a stinging where they went around right along, and they sent the kids in that were underage.
Right.
And the law enforcement people were very, it wasn't like, oh, we have to do this.
Right.
They know, of course, many of them have young even teenagers, but they know that these are the things that are going to lead them to have to call a parent in the middle of the night. I mean, they've been there, they've seen it.
Yeah, anyone
That and the drunk driving that can
Right.
also happen.
Anyone who's done a death notification, and law enforcement falls obviously in that category, you don't have to convince them. They're absolutely certain. And we in the metro area are extremely fortunate. We have incredibly dedicated law enforcement that cares about this issue. So
Even though there's a shortage of manpower all over the state,
Yes,
they
yes.
find time to...
yes, it's an issue that's important to them because, again, they don't want to make those phone calls and those calls to
Are
homes.
federal funds ever available for these kinds of things,
Well, federal-
or even regional funds?
Well, actually, federal funds are available to support, for instance, the work that we do, as well as federal highway funds to support overtime for law enforcement. So those monies are there.
So there are some answers to
there
the
are some.
problem that there aren't enough hours in the day or enough officers.
Right. No, to say that's an unending pot is a gross overstatement.
Right.
So certainly there are challenges, but at least there is a recognition on the part of Congress that there are some issues. And I think it's important to note that Congressman Tom Osborne was one of 7 senators and congressmen to introduce what's called Stop Underage Drinking Act legislation. And so there's a hope and desire that it'll be addressed even at a heightened level in Congress in the months and years to come.
Just a couple more minutes, but
Sure.
I do want to mention a couple of other things that have cropped up. Well, it's an ongoing thing, is the advertising versus the First Amendment.
Right.
You know, the advertisers that whose job it is to make liquor look enticing. The new trendy drinks, the new trendy liquors,
Flavored
the
malt beverages.
cool bottles.
Right.
I do like Mike's Hard Lemonade, but that would be an
Yes.
example. But you can't limit what they do.
Well, you can and you can't. You do have, the industry has a voluntary code that they are to adhere to in terms of their marketing and advertising practices. What we find is that they don't do that, and so holding them accountable to even that voluntary standard is important. So it really is about saying, don't tell us you're going to not advertise to our young people. We know from the research from Georgetown University that kids are overexposed to those alcohol advertising ads, and so it's important that we recognize that and look at that in that large environmental picture that we're looking at. In terms of the First Amendment issue, it's certainly not about restricting alcohol advertising alone. It's about looking at the way in which you want products to be advertised within your community. Do you really want a convenience store plastered its windows with all kinds of advertising?
So again, the local pressure and recommendations.
Sure.
And then the other thing, we just have a minute, one of the burgeoning possible issues is the alcohol without liquid, the sort of nebulizers
AWOL.
where you you sniff it, it goes directly to the bloodstream, and they
Right.
say like no carbs, no calories. So that's just something for people to, you're going to be
it's frightening.
keeping an eye on that.
Well, and the Commission has taken leadership and it will be pursuing some opportunities to do regulations.
Well, I'm cutting you off
That's
because
all right.
I want to wish good luck to some graduates who've been working on putting this show on for the last few years. Chris Devon, Kendra Moran, Anthony Blue, and Kyle Beneke. Good luck to you. Thank you for your help. And Diane, thank you as always for helping us understand these and that we really can have an impact.
Thanks much.
And thank you for joining us this week on Consider This. ProjectExtraMile.org if you want to get more information.
Thanks.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.